David? Yes. Our third presenter is David Techau, who is a PhD candidate in the School of Architecture and Design at the University of Tasmania in Australia. He's a licensed architect in the U.S. also and holds a Bachelor of Architecture from Arizona State University and a Master of Science in Human-Environment Relations from Cornell, New York. He has worked with Apple in California, Time Magazine in New York, and then SOM in New York also. David?
Well, thank you very much. I just want to make clear up front, I've got the hard slog of my doctorate ahead of me, and I appreciate the honorary doctorate from the Academy here. They listed me as Dr. Techau, and I haven't quite made it here yet. I'm about 60% into my four-year program, and just in the point, I'm just wrapping up my field work and getting ready to put together my thesis and prepare for my examination. So let me just say, first of all, that I am not a neuroscience either, but I am an architect that's open-minded to new ideas that are coming at us from all directions. And neuroscience is providing some amazing openings into new discoveries that are occurring all around us. I want to acknowledge my supervisory team here. Dr. Caradwin Owen, who is the acting head of the School of Architecture and Design, Roger Fay, who is emeritus professor in architecture and design and part of the Wicking Institute of Dementia, and Douglas Payton, who is a professor in the School of Psychology at the University of Tasmania. Now, a lot of people ask me, what the hell is a Yank doing down in Tasmania? Well, like the last session, my wife has an elderly mother up in Sydney, up in the northern suburbs in Newport, and she's helping her brother care for her dear mother, who's going to be 90 in November. So we're taking advantage of this window of opportunity. My research is really looking at subjective well-being in green buildings and green office buildings, where most of us spend most of our lives. Most of my research at Cornell was in work environments, so I'm sort of continuing on with that mode here. One of the sparks that opened my eyes to this was when, about a dozen years ago, when I attended the National AIA Convention in San Diego, California, the keynote speaker was Dr. Fred Gage from the Salk Institute of Biological Studies. Dr. Gage and his colleagues have identified and created this neurogenesis sort of approach. For many years, people thought that our brains quit growing, quit developing at a certain age. Well, they're discovering, based on their work, and obviously a lot of this work is in animal studies, but they're talking about work in enriched environments, that over the course of the lifespan, new dendrites in our neurons are continuously growing as long as we're active and as long as we are immersing ourselves in environments that are enriching and empowering to us. Now, he said, this is a statement that has stuck with me over this dozen years: change the environment, change the brain, change the behavior. And I took this in reality when my wife and I hiked up into the Styx Valley in Tasmania. This is our Tasmanian idea of skyscrapers. This is a Eucalyptus regnan. This particular tree was alive during the Ming Dynasty. It is approximately, this particular tree, they call it the Sentinel, is 99.7 meters high, 327 feet, almost 30 stories, and this is just one of hundreds of them in this tall tree reserve in Tasmania. It's one of the most amazing places on the planet, and this is one of the largest flowering plants in the world. The actual evidence-based approach to neuroscience and well-being is occurring across the different spectrums, but two of the primary areas and people that are exploring this area is Kent Berridge, University of Michigan, and Mort Kingelbach at Oxford, and they are actually looking at which part of the brains are being fired up when people are creating or experiencing pleasant things. For example, hedonic hotspots, they're identifying and pinpointing in the brain where the brain is highlighting when they're looking at pleasant thoughts, when they're listening to pleasant sounds, when you're thinking about pleasant thoughts, when you're remembering pleasant memories, or when you're working on pleasant tasks. And when you see that, working on pleasant tasks, this is all, many of you probably heard this sort of idea of flow, that when you're in the flow and working on pleasant tasks, it's almost like a meditative process. The brain on meditation is very, very similar to this last particular sequence here. So when I'm looking at studying well-being in green buildings, I need to find some well buildings. So I went to the Green Building Council of Australia and looking on their Green Star program, trying to identify some candidates for my research. And primarily I'm looking at indoor environmental quality, where there's different points in this sort of rating system, but I wanted to look at world leadership, world-class buildings, office buildings in Melbourne, Australia. And I chose Melbourne because it's one of the hotbeds of green building design in Australia. Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and in some instances Perth, but Melbourne is just across the Bass Strait from Tasmania, so it's about 150 miles away from home, and it's a little more easily accessible. So we're looking at 3 green buildings in the Docklands in Melbourne. The Docklands has been in existence for about 25 years. It's basically doubled the amount of office space in the CBD of Melbourne over the course of that time. It's right on the Southern Cross Station, the train station, so this whole area has been developed from basically nothing, Victoria Harbour and the Yarra River, over the past 25 years. I've identified 3 buildings, 3 case study buildings. The first case study is a global information communication technology company that consists, they're occupying about 4 floors, about 4,800 meters squared of space in this building, and 350 staff. The second case study site is a global engineering company with offices in South Africa and Australia. And they're occupying 7 floors in this building. They're housing approximately 7 staff in almost 9,800 square meters of space. And the third case study, which I just happened to fall upon at a cold call with the director of this project, the third case study is a major health insurance company in Australia. And they just occupied, just last fall, this structure. And they're occupying 11 floors, approximately 40,000 square meters of space. So my research is formulated into these 3 case study sites. I am doing a mixed method approach. I'm using the 3 case study sites and using an NVivo 10 database to gather and collate and collect all of my information. All my interview transcripts are going into the database. All my images and floor plans and everything that has been provided to me by these companies is going into the database, where then I can thereby sort of start the analysis of the data and work my way through. And I'm just starting this slog as we speak. So semi-structured interviews, I did 12 interviews at each site. With a broad range of staff, all volunteers. I had to get ethics approval for all of this work, both the qualitative and the quantitative work. I'm using an online occupant survey, both pre and post occupancy. As a postgraduate, I got licensed with the Usable Building Trust in the UK, and Adrian Lehman, who has developed over the past 20 years this particular survey, and it's been in use all over the world. And it's an excellent survey for getting sort of people's ideas about how they want to, how they're doing in these types of environments. I'm using visual and document analysis and pre and post move data. This is a general floor layout of the first case study site. And I just want you to look, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the floor plan, if you look at the floor plan, the building core elements are up on the upper part of the plan, the sort of the elevators and the sort of atrium level. But if you look, 80% of the building lettable area is open plan workstations. There is a driving force in the office environments right now to reduce the footprint of the buildings, of corporate buildings, and to create more open environments. You can see very few floor-to-ceiling partitions in the space. Most of them are showed in the green area on the floor plan. Most of the spaces are standardized, what I call mass standardization of workstations to accommodate their people in these work environments. And let me just run through quickly a few interior photographs so you can get a sense of what we're talking about here. This is the entry level. We can see green walls, the large atrium plenum that draws air up through the building. This is sort of where, and the glass elevators that drop people off, visitors and so forth, to this level. This is sort of the common work area. You can see the work panels are much lower. There's a lot of green that's integrated into. The interior core is where the offices are. If you look at the office walls don't go all the way to the roof because they're using a chilled beam system in this particular building. So there's no airflow, so they need to open up those offices so people could be comfortable in those areas. But what's happened is those offices, the people in those offices, they have become sort of like a sound cone that people don't even realize that all the sound, everything that they do in these offices is being carried to all the spaces around them. And finally, this one that shows, again, on this wall, on the curved wall, you can see all of the activities, the acoustical design that's going on to control the level of noise in these open environments, because these are all open, pretty much open across the board. The second case study site, which was occupied in 2012, is, again, you can see, if we look out, ignore the core elements, we can see that this is basically all the lettable floor areas is filled with standardized workstations. So people are working in standardized workstations. There's no private offices in this floor plan. All the executives sit in the corners, or the sort of the triangulated corners of the floor plate. So the offices have disappeared in this particular plate. But interesting, what's happening here is there's new intercommunicating stairs that are being introduced into the work environment so that people don't have to go take the fire stairs or get on the lifts to interact with people on the other levels. And this is opening up whole new ways for people to work together and communicate across different floors. They can go up and down, and it's just a way for people to encounter each other and work together more productively. And this, again, this is, you can see now the panels, the window, you can see across the entire floor plate. The windows, everybody's open. They have workplaces. People can move around in different types of flexible spaces and so forth. And we're also seeing the introduction of more informal areas where people can actually relax. And there's this sort of tendency in these corporate workplaces to bring the sort of the condiments of home into the workplace so that people have a tendency to feel a little more comfortable at the workplace and feel a little bit more relaxed. The third case study, as I said, was just occupied in 2014. This is a fairly amazing building. All the employees in this building are assigned a floor and a neighborhood, and they're assigned a locker. And other than that, it's called activity-based work. It's growing like wildfire across Australia, and I'm not sure in other places, but I know in Australia this is becoming a very dominant force. Activity-based work. People do not have an assigned workspace. They come in the morning and they work wherever they need to find. They find a place to work and do whatever they need to do. But you can see this is sort of a boomerang shape, which is very appropriate for Australia. But you can see, I don't know if you can see it very clearly, but there's areas of neighborhoods that are outlined in this floor plan. And it's mostly filled with all kinds of open tables and workstations and stuff, but none of it is assigned. Nobody has an assigned workspace in this particular facility. This is a picture of the intercommunicating stairs looking down through the different levels of the building. They are occupying approximately 11 floors currently. But you can see that this openness and this ability for people to move around, it's really helping with the health and well-being of the staff, because they're having to get up and move around a little bit. And they're actually putting tracks on the people's ankles so they can actually see and measure how much more they're walking every day and through the week. This is the concierge level on the first level, where they meet all their outside clients and people. They don't bring them up into the building. They meet them here at the concierge level, where they put a lot of money into the quality of the spaces and the interiors and so forth. And then this beautiful space, this is called the cloud, this hovering sort of entity up here that's hovering above the workspace, this two-story workspace. But this is a place for teams and people to get together to collaborate and work on different ideas and different things in this environment. This is activity-based work, and this is what they call, there's no workspaces anymore. They call them work points now. You have all these work points available. The density is about 80%. They look at 80% of the available workspaces are available at any time, so people can move around and find their way in whatever types of works they want to do and with whatever teams they want to be working with. So this is a completely flexible space, no assigned work area, and it's actually transforming the idea of work in the 21st century. Now, I'm studying subjective well-being, and Ed Diner, who is one of the founders of the positive psychology movement in the United States, said there's three components to subjective well-being: the presence of positive affect, the absence of negative effect, and satisfaction with life in general. Well, I'm really focused on the presence of positive effect here. So I'm using this sort of experimental framework because I want us to look at cognitive, affective, where we're talking about the thinking, the feelings, and the behavior. I want to understand how people are responding to these environments. So whatever their perceptions are of this environment, whatever their feelings are about this environment, or whatever behavioral outcomes are created because of these environments, I want to understand this. So I'm using this sort of an experimental framework. Now I started with some of the document analysis, and this is basically design briefs that they hand to architects and so forth. But if you notice, if we go to the bottom line, one of the biggest parts of this driver for these corporations is to reduce their ongoing operating cost and to reduce the real estate cost. This is occurring across the industry, across Australia. But there you can see all these actions sort of reflect, create, provide, foster. They're trying to accomplish new ways of working for people. And then the visual analysis. Now, I'm not going to go through this, but you've seen the floor plans, but I want to point out two of the ones in the middle in the orange. I've witnessed from 2009 to 2014 the demise of the private office in the offices and the demise of the dedicated workspace. And this is pretty powerful information because we're seeing a transformation of the work environment. Now, all of us, I'm sure in this room, have spent a third of our working lives in these types of buildings. I don't know about these types, but work buildings. And this is where the trends are going, at least in Australia, and what I'm experiencing in my research. And this trend is what they're calling the disappearing workplace. The actual square meters per person is dramatically being reduced across these time frames. And the stasis of having a private office, a personal workspace, or even a assigned desk has disappeared across the industry. So we're looking at whole new ways of working. People have to adjust to this, and they're asked to adjust to this. Actually, these companies are spending untold millions of dollars on change initiatives to prepare their people to work in these environments. You just can't place somebody in here and expect them to be productive. So they have to go through change initiatives and they're making major investments in these types of environments. But what happens, and this is an old effect that was listed in Peopleware, that as you reduce the square feet or the square meter per person, this is inversely proportional. The density of the buildings increase. And with increased density, you have increased interruptions, you have increased noise, you have increased disruptions. And this is just one model that I'm using to understand how, and this is just 6 people shown here, okay? This is 6 people. If we look at the far end, we have 15 connections between those 6 people, 4 areas of interruptions, and when we multiply that by the 15 connections, we have a possibility of 60 interruptions across, just through those 6 people. So, affective terms, another one I'm using this way. I don't have a functional MRI available in my research, but I'm asking people, okay, what is the difference between your old environment and your new environment? And these are the perceptions or the reflections that people across these 3 case studies have reflected to me. And you can read these for yourself, but you can see that all of them are fairly positive on the perception side. There's modern, open, fresh, light, clean, these are positive effects that are showing up in people's perceptions of the workplace. Now, and then I'm using this particular model to highlight and place these types of perceptions. This is called an affect circumplex, and in lieu of a functional MRI, I'm using this model. On the horizontal axis is the well-being, or the pleasant and unpleasant. You can see well-being on one end, ill-being and anhedonia on the other end, hedonia, eudaimonia, and on the vertical axis is the enriched or impoverished environment axis. So we can start then to track where buildings are falling into this affect circumplex based on the reactions of the people and the perceptions of the people. So this is one model that I'm using in my research and plan to develop this more in the in vivo software. And then this is the positive effects that I accrued through my interview process with these 36 people across these 3 organizations. But most people said that there's more green. They appreciate there's a real strong identity. People have a real strong identity. They feel proud for being a part of a company that has some sort of commitment to a green and sustainable future. And obviously, they're healthier environments because they're meeting Green Star indoor environmental quality standards. So the environment is healthier. They're getting more daylight. The air movement is better. They're more collaborative, they're more open, they're more informal, they're more mobile for sure, and they're more comfortable overall. But one of the things in Australia that's interesting is they're more egalitarian. Everybody is treated the same, nobody has anything different. So in Australia, at least, this is a very sort of cultural thing that they feel that everybody, even the executives, should be a part of the group and not have any sort of special perks or special offices or space. We've done some surveys in the post-move survey for the case study 3, and we're seeing pretty positive spikes in terms of more positive, healthier working, more collaborative working, and more productive working. So these are just spikes, and this shows spikes across the 7 working levels of that particular building. So this particular graph is showing the reactions or the responses of people across those 7 levels in the building in case study 3. And I mentioned before the BUS occupant survey, and this is 58 study variables. We just closed this survey down a couple of weeks ago, so we're just starting to get some data in. But I wanted to share with you 2 particular. I asked Adrian if he would run two tables for this particular conference. So because there's 2 factors here that I think are related to well-being, and that's perceived health and perceived productivity. And we can see that in both cases, the pre and the post-move, that we're seeing some positive shifts in perceived health in these buildings, in this building, and perceived productivity in the building. So that's, in a nutshell, is where I'm at with my research. I've got a long way to go. I've got to finish up my data analysis and all the things that are starting to come in now. And I'm working with Mr. Lehman to start the analysis of that information. But let me leave you with something here. One of my favorite thinkers in organizational behavior and management is Dr. Charles Handy in the UK. And he presented an idea with about a double curve, the second curve, and I firmly believe that the old curve, the resource extraction curve, the fossil fuel curve, all those things that we're seeing that we're moving into decline over the next 20, 30 years. And there has to be a second wave of thinking that is going to go something to replace that. And certainly it's got green, a sustainable approach that has to be a thing. Now, a lot of architects are starting to talk about regenerative architecture, a new architecture that actually creates more value than it takes out of the environment. So, and finally, Tom Peters is another one of my management guru in Cornell grad. What's around you is inside you. And it's no surprise to any of us here, I don't think, that our surroundings have a tremendous impact on how we feel, how we act, how we think, how we love, how we relate to other people. So that's my research, and I appreciate your attention today. Thank you very much for the opportunity.